Attorneys. Which divorce process has been the biggest scum for former spouses? Story 1. Conspiring with the family friend lawyer. This one hits close to home because it happened between my parents. We had a family friend who was a lawyer, and my parents agreed that he would be the lawyer for both of them as a mediator. So, as the assets were being divided, my dad got absolutely slammed. She was going to get the house, cars, half his retirement, and an insane amount of alimony, to the tune of like $2,500 a month for the rest of her life. My dad has a good job as a municipal employee, but that was probably 70%-ish of his paycheck. Turns out that my mom and the family friend actually conspired to rip my dad off and make it seem like that's what a divorce settlement looks like. And she was going to kick back more money under the table after the dust had settled. Dad just didn't know how these things worked. So after some convincing, he finally went out and got his own lawyer. He got a very fair divorce settlement after that. Mom still to this day can't understand why we don't talk to her much. Story 2. The heartbreaking dog shipment. Worked at an airport. Big burly guy brings an ugly-ass dog in a crate to the counter. He is clearly misty-eyed. Turns out, wife got the dog in the divorce, and he has to send it to her, and she told him as soon as she gets it, she is putting it down. He asks if he can have some time with the dog before the flight, so they go out in the grass, and they both roll around in the grass, dog's tail just wagging away, not knowing anything about his future. The guy puts him back in the crate, drops him off the counter, says thanks, and then just walked out head down and just looking crushed. Story 3. Accused of causing cancer. Too long, didn't read. My client's spouse accused him of giving his deceased wife cancer. I represented a guy who was on his second marriage. His first wife passed away from cancer. He and his kids were obviously devastated. My client was a pretty sensitive guy with a big heart. His second wife could be very charming, which was why he fell for her. But it was all a facade. Anyway, to make a long story about a lengthy divorce short, my client met a very kind and affectionate woman during his case. They really hit it off and were basically engaged, even though his divorce was far from over. The fiancé started having health problems and was diagnosed with a form of terminal cancer. Somehow, the second wife found out about this and tried to use the cancer diagnosis against my client in court. She developed this crazy theory that my client had killed his first wife by giving her cancer and that he was doing the same thing to his fiancée. The second wife's attorney, who was quite good, refused to be a party to it. The attorney never addressed the argument in court and didn't even ask the second wife any questions about it during testimony. Rather, the attorney informed the judge that the second wife wished to address the court directly about an issue. The judge allowed her to do so, in a highly irregular move. The second wife told her crazy conspiracy theory to the... Story 4. Violating restraining order for dying mother. Bad separation. Wife filed a restraining order on the husband. Very common. Wasn't a terrible guy, but not great either. A year into the divorce, his mother was dying. He asked his sister to speak with his ex-wife and asked to bring the kids to see her in the hospital before she died. The wife never did. Instead, she went to the court and said he violated the restraining order by trying to contact her. You can't contact someone through another party. He admitted it and explained the situation, but was found in breach of the order. His mother died while he was locked up, and the wife never brought the kids to see her. Story 5. Unexpected court betrayal. Not a lawyer, but when I was a kid, my parents got divorced. My mom met a guy on the internet and left my dad for him. My sisters and I were all teenagers, and being that my mom had never really been around, decided that we all wanted to live with him. We all had to write a letter stating our wishes, and it was understood that we would stay with him. My mom didn't even seem to care. Additionally, my dad had this retirement account from his old job. He wasn't rich at all and had worked his ass off for everything he'd ever had. When he got hurt on the job, he could have sued, but was promised that in exchange for him not suing, they'd keep him around. Instead, they canned him, and he left with about $100,000, I think, in a 401k type account that he'd been saving for nearly 30 years. Lastly, my dad had his house. It was a 3-bedroom, 1-bath brick house that was all of about 800 square feet. It wasn't much at all, but my dad loved the place. My mom couldn't stand that house and wanted to move for as long as I could remember. That was another contentious subject that led to the divorce. He'd been paying on it forever, and when he left his old job, he took out a small chunk and paid it off. Anyway, their separation is progressing, and it's understood we're living with him. She was so in love with this internet guy that she didn't care. He was in school halfway around the country, and she was going to move there to be with him. We knew we'd get by just fine. They seemed amicable, and it was understood how this would all play out. The day in court finally comes, and instead of what we all assumed, even my dad's lawyer, she goes to the court with all these crazy claims. He was an abusive alcoholic, he beat us, and my mom nightly, he was crazy, and no one would be safe in his care. My mom got full custody. She got 50% of his house, and 50% of his retirement account. My dad was stunned. That judgment would basically bankrupt him. In order for him to keep the house, he'd essentially have to clean out his retirement account and give her everything. The night of their divorce, I went over to see him. He was almost catatonic. He just stared off in space the entire time, and would mumble whenever I asked him a question. I've never seen anyone like that, ever. My birthday was 2 days away, and I asked if he wanted to do something for my birthday, and he... Story 6. Setting a Trap for the Affair. When I got divorced, my alcoholic wife of 18 years had started another affair, this time with her addictions counselor. My lawyer and I laid a trap for them. Just in case you don't know, intimate relations between a counselor and patient are very frowned upon by the regulatory bodies. And I was more than angry after putting her through rehab, $25,000, which I didn't have to do, only to have her fall back into her old behavior. Shortly before the divorce was finalized, I filed a complaint with the state body licensing health professions. Knowing they were in some peril because of their unprofessional relationship, I had already gotten him fired. She had backed off her exorbitant demands. I paid her a very modest settlement, kept the house, got custody of the 3 tween-age kids, plus got child support. Her lawyer naturally included a clause in the divorce where I had to agree to not say anything negative about her lover and their relationship. But the lawyer messed up and never asked if I had already filed charges, and thus didn't require me to rescind them. The lawyer had assumed I was just bad-mouthing them to neighbors and friends, and it never occurred to the lawyer that we were doing much more. When the Board of Health Professions responded to my complaint shortly after the divorce was finalized, I told them that it would take a subpoena to get me to testify. A subpoena trumps a divorce settlement. They were happy to oblige. They stripped his license and placed him on a register of sanctioned health professionals. He never worked again. They were broke in a handful of years, and she divorced him when the money ran out. In the interim, his mother had died, leaving fair-sized estate, so it took longer than I expected. Oh, and the frosting on the cake was that his wife and I traded notes, notably hotel receipts from the time of their affair, that helped each of us in our respective divorces. Justice was served. Story 7. Deeding land to spite wife. Not a lawyer, but this is the history of my house and property. The house used to be owned by a very successful businessman. The property is gorgeous. It overlooks a river and marsh, backed up by thousands of acres of forest and untouched beauty in Wisconsin. Back about 20 years ago, the wife and husband got into a bitter divorce. The wife loved the property. It's beautiful. She loved the river and birds and all the nature around it. So what did the husband do? He, as the owner of the property, deeded it all to Nature Preserve and the state. Something like 5,000 acres of new public land were created. We, the people, won, but she lost big time. My house is the only one on the river in that area, but there is now tons of public access points, and we all enjoy sharing the land with our community. Story 8. Emergency hearing trick. My narcissistic ex threw me out of my own house and threatened to harm me. I ended up in a woman's shelter, and he stayed in the house. He was supposed to do some basic repairs to the house to make it marketable, but did almost nothing, which is why we had no offers for almost a year. Then one day we get the strangest offer, a lowball offer only good for 8 hours. I called my realtor, and she said that they'd been making lowball offers all over town, trying to find someone desperate enough to sell without verifying financing, income, or any of the issues needed before accepting an offer. I turned it down, but my husband was the first idiot to say yes. A few days later, I get a call from my lawyer. My husband's lawyer had gotten an emergency hearing on the house, claiming it was necessary due to time constraints of the purchase offer, but the offer had expired after the 8 hours, several days before. My lawyer had to appear over phone, and I was never even notified of the hearing. The judge ordered the house sold without my consent, at a much lower price than we could have gotten for it. Still makes me furious today. Story 9. Failed service attempts. We were working on an amicable dissolution. Then for some reason my ex and her attorney filed for divorce with several accusations of abuse. That never happened. They failed to serve me. Failed to say anything. Kept it a secret until 4 days before the pre-trial hearing. They would have received a summary judgment for 90% of my take-home pay if I failed to show. By some twisted luck, a wheel literally fell off my car. Since I had to buy a new vehicle, it would have changed all the dissolution paperwork. I tried for days to reach the attorney. Finally, with only 2 days before the hearing, her attorney admitted that they filed and I should seek my own legal counsel. The magistrate was not pleased and forced them to complete service. We offered to waive service and open negotiations. Ex and attorney declined. They failed again then next week. They handed me paperwork, but not actual service, so the magistrate made them do it again. All hearings were on Tuesdays, which I had off anyway. My ex had to take unpaid days off every time. By the third hearing, they still had not actually completed service, but they were ready to start negotiations if we waived the service requirement. There was a ton more shady stuff. My ex would offer bad deals and decline and changes we requested. We finally came to an agreement. Then they rescinded their offer. My ex then approached me personally in the recovery room after my son's surgery. I told her that they weren't bargaining in good faith, and I planned to take it to trial. My ex realized this would force the sale of the house. She turned pale, as at the time there was no way she'd afford a similar home. Her attorney threatened to force the sale of my firearms. I told my attorney I didn't care. I was so frustrated that I was willing to sell everything, split the money earned, and walk away. Apparently, they knew I was serious. Suddenly, everything went very smooth. Story 10. Losing the right to use own last name. I am an attorney, but wasn't my case, but was a family member. My family member started what turned out to be an extremely lucrative family business using his last name. He used the profits to expand the business, set up satellite businesses for their kids, and paid for his wife to go to law school, in cash. She graduates and is now in the district attorney's office, and decides she doesn't like he works all the time, travel for supplies, etc. She files for divorce. He gave her the family home, cars, chunk of the savings, etc. She in turn demanded the family business, so he gave her the primary location. She then demanded he agree to a non-compete. He fought that tooth and nail, but she then demanded and buried him in paperwork and permit and license issues and such from her friends in government until she won the right to his own last name. He couldn't use his own name when he started a new similar business. And later, when an advertisement put his picture on it, she sued him, claiming a violation of their agreement as his photo was the same as using the name. After several rounds of separate lawsuits and claims, they finally settled. He indeed gave up the right to use his last name, but a court finally ruled she couldn't block him from using his first name as it didn't appear in original business. They then settled the divorce. Story 11. Husband drove car to worthlessness. Story from my parents who are lawyers. So throughout the divorce proceedings, there was a car that was a huge point of contention between the husband and wife. After months and months of saying he would never let the wife have the car, the husband concedes in exchange for something great, like one of their summer houses. It turns out he had been driving the car for 3 hours every day in a big loop around the city, putting thousands and thousands of miles on it, basically making it worthless. The amount of planning and spite that went into that was amazing. Story 12. Husband refused joint tax filing. I did some consulting work for 2 divorce attorneys when I was in grad school. Their client was a career airline pilot. His wife worked part-time, so there was a huge income disparity. It was an ugly divorce. During the process, but before the final decree, tax time rolled around. The wife's attorney calls my guys and says, her accountant just called. If they can just share their W-2s and file jointly, they each stand to save about $8,000 over married filing separately. My guys took that info to the husband. He says, to heck with her, losing $8,000 is going to be way worse for her than it will be for me. Cold as ice, man. Story 13. Dad overpaid child support due to spite. Dad was a real jerk, and Mom tried to save him a lot of money during the divorce. They have 3 kids who are 16, 13, and 8. Dad wouldn't sign any agreement my mom's lawyer produced. It had to be his idea, and from his lawyer, or it wasn't getting signed. Dad's lawyer was incompetent, and sends an agreement that states he will pay $2,000 a month in child support until all kids are 18. Mom tried to explain to Dad that it needed to be revised to lower every time a child turned 18. Dad called Mom a terrible name during that negotiation, so Mom said forget it and signed the agreement, and Dad paid the $2,000 a month for 10 years, when he should have been paying around $1,400 a month for 5 years and $700 a month for the last 5 years. Story 14. Husband quit high-paying job to reduce alimony. Not a lawyer, but one of the top posts from Pro Revenge is related. Credit to a Reddit user. Not me, but a guy the first worked with 10 years ago. I guess it counts as a revenge. I worked with a guy who really stuck it to his ex-wife. When I met him, he was working in a sporting goods store making $8 an hour. He was not really like the other retail workers. He was older, well-groomed, well-spoken, clearly educated, etc. One night after work, he gets into his car, and I couldn't help but notice that it was a very, very nice, newish Jaguar. I asked him how he could afford it, and he explained it to me. He had been an SVP at a well-known Fortune 50 company, which I will not mention the name of, pulling in $300,000 with bonuses and stock options. He was married, but the marriage fell apart, and in the divorce, she demanded that she get the house and 40% of his pay in alimony. He didn't like that, so he quit his job and got the job at the sports store. His ex-wife's alimony? 40% of minimum wage. Story 15. Ex-wife hid meat to ruin house. I am an accountant, not a divorce lawyer. Had a client hide Ziploc bags of ground meat throughout the house, in air vents, the attic, behind water heater, etc. I think it was at least 20 to 30 bags that took months to find all of them. Story 16. Ex-wife falsely accused of postpartum depression for custody. Also, not a divorce lawyer, but my friend's husband really did her dirty. He kept telling her he believed she had postpartum depression after having their kid. Finally, she agreed to go seek help, since he kept putting it in her head. After like 3 months of therapy/doctor's appointments, he took her records to his divorce lawyer and is currently fighting for full custody because she is unfit. Story 17. Ex-wife dragged out divorce for legal fees. Over here in the Netherlands, most legal costs are paid for by the government if your income is below a certain threshold. In practice, this means that if one of the spouses in a divorce has little to no income and the other one has a normal income, the one with the normal income will have to pay a lot if the process drags on. Considering there are plenty of ways to drag it on, I've seen cases approach ridiculous amounts of billable hours. There is a catch to this, however. Your lawyer is paid a set amount if he/she is paid by the government. However, should the money you receive after a divorce or whatever exceed a certain number, you are expected to pay your own lawyer, which is the reason we still keep track of the hours in these cases. So this one woman who thought she was screwing over her ex-husband by dragging the divorce over multiple years got a payout of approximately 40,000 euros by the end of it. Unfortunately for her, she had to surrender most of that straight back in lawyer costs. There was a certain sense of justice in there. Also proves time and again that when there is conflict, the only true winners are usually the lawyers. Story 18. Ex-wife maxed out joint credit cards before divorce. Banker here. Had heaps of situations where joint overdraft/credit card comes up just before divorce to the absolute surprise of one of the parties. Drained down to zero, of course. Especially sad when it's students/young kids who find themselves heartbroken after the breakup, and with a debt they can't afford. Story 19. Ex-wife falsely accused husband of molestation for custody. My stepdad has been divorced twice before. Both marriages had kids involved. First divorce was mutual, and had shared custody of the kids. Second was because he was cheated on, and also involved shared custody of kids. Wife number one lived out of state, and kept no showing, forcing costly legal action every time he wanted to see his kid. Wife number two was initially supportive of him through this, until they had kids themselves, and the cost became too much. Wife number one wanted him to give up legal rights to their kids, and after years and years of legal battles that nearly bankrupted them, wife number two basically gave him an ultimatum: give up the kids or get divorced. He knew that getting divorced from wife number two could result in him never seeing his other kids either, so eventually he was forced into giving up kid number one. A few years later, wife number two cheats on him, they get divorced. Wife number two tells the kids it was him that cheated, but to never mention it to him in case he gets angry. Initially they were splitting custody very evenly, but eventually wife number two figured out that she would get more money if she was technically sole custodian, and he would see them on that basis because he loves his children. So to arrange for this to happen, she accused him of molesting their youngest child, then used that accusation to gain full custody before the charge was dropped due to total lack of evidence. Then she tells the kids that he did molest them, again something he didn't know she told them for years. Upshot is that he was forced to give up first kids permanently by one wife, and then second wife had the rest of his kids think he was a cheater and sexual predator, and thus be terrified of him and never truly love him, so she could save face and pick up a larger check. Like Tammy 1 and Tammy 2 on Overdrive. Story 20. Wife glues everything in revenge. I work for a divorce attorney now, but the craziest thing came to my attention when I worked for the prosecuting attorney. This couple was breaking up and Mr. left the house. Mrs. went to work the next morning as usual. When she returned home in the evening, she found Mr. had been to the house and removed his clothing and belongings as she expected. What she didn't expect was that he had also gorilla glued her belongings together. He glued the TV remote to the table, the phone to its cradle, the couch pillows to the couch, and even glued the vacuum cleaner to the carpet. She called the police and reported this as property damage. The police went with her through the house documenting dozens of items glued to various things. But for days she was discovering random things, and she would call to amend or update her report. My gosh darn oven mitts were glued to the wall. Or, he glued the freaking sheets together in the linen closet. I've seen people do and say really awful things to each other, but that was diabolical. Story 21. Wife sabotaged husband's business deals. During a contentious divorce, the wife, who had been a silent partner in her husband's small business, secretly contacted his key clients and suppliers. She spread false rumors that the business was failing and that her husband was unreliable due to personal issues. This caused several major deals to fall through, tanking the business's value before asset division. The husband later found out through a loyal client who tipped him off, but the damage was done. His business was nearly worthless, and she argued for a larger share of their other assets to compensate for her stake in the now failing company. Story 22. Husband faked unemployment to avoid alimony. The husband, a high-earning consultant, claimed he was laid off and had no income during the divorce proceedings to minimize alimony payments. He provided forged documents showing he was unemployed and living off savings. In reality, he had set up a shell company under a friend's name and funneled his income through it. The wife's attorney hired a forensic accountant who uncovered the scheme, but not before the husband had delayed the process for over a year, racking up her legal fees while he lived comfortably. Story 23. Wife hid assets in secret accounts. In a high-net-worth divorce, the wife systematically transferred large sums from their joint accounts to offshore accounts she had set up under her sister's name. She claimed to the court that she had no access to these funds and was financially dependent on her husband. The husband's legal team eventually traced the transactions through a private investigator, but the wife had already moved the money multiple times, making recovery nearly impossible. She walked away with a significant portion of their wealth while pleading poverty. Story 24. Husband trashed family home before leaving. Before moving out, the husband, furious about the divorce, deliberately damaged the family home to reduce its value in the asset split. He punched holes in walls, ripped out fixtures, and poured paint over hardwood floors. He claimed it was an emotional outburst, but evidence from neighbors showed he spent days methodically trashing the place. The wife was forced to sell the house at a loss, significantly reducing her share of the marital assets. Story 25. Wife lied about paternity for custody leverage. During the divorce, the wife claimed that their youngest child wasn't her husband's, hoping to gain full custody by arguing he had no legal rights to the child. She fabricated a story about an affair and even produced a fake DNA test. The husband, devastated, demanded a court-ordered paternity test, which confirmed he was the father. The wife's lie backfired, and the judge awarded him primary custody, citing her dishonesty as evidence of her unfit parenting. Story 26. Husband blackmailed wife with private photos. The husband threatened to leak intimate photos of his wife to her employer and family unless she agreed to unfavorable divorce terms, including giving up her claim to their vacation home. She initially complied out of fear, but her attorney advised her to report the blackmail to the police. The husband was charged with extortion, and the court ruled heavily in her favor, granting her the vacation home and additional spousal support for emotional distress. Story 27. Wife drained college funds for kids. While negotiating the divorce, the wife secretly withdrew nearly all the money from their children's college savings accounts to fund her new lifestyle. She claimed the accounts were joint, and she was entitled to the funds. The husband only discovered the depletion when he tried to access the accounts for their eldest child's tuition. The court ordered her to repay the funds, but she had already spent most of it, leaving the kids with almost nothing for their education. Story 28. Husband faked mental illness to delay proceedings. The husband, a wealthy entrepreneur, pretended to have a severe mental breakdown to delay the divorce and avoid splitting his assets. He checked himself into a psychiatric facility and had his lawyer argue he was unfit to participate in court. Meanwhile, he was actively managing his business from the facility. The wife's legal team hired a private investigator who obtained evidence of his lucidity, forcing the case to move forward, but not before months of delays and increased legal costs. Story 29. Wife planted evidence of infidelity. To gain sympathy in court, the wife planted fake text messages and emails on her husband's phone and computer, suggesting he was having an affair. She presented these to the judge as proof of his infidelity, hoping for a better settlement. The husband's tech-savvy lawyer hired a digital forensics expert who proved the messages were fabricated. The wife's credibility was destroyed, and she received a smaller settlement due to her attempt to deceive the court. Story 30. Husband hid Bitcoin fortune. During the divorce, the husband claimed he had lost all his cryptocurrency investments in a, quote, market crash. In reality, he had transferred his Bitcoin to a hidden wallet to conceal it from the asset division. The wife, suspicious of his sudden loss, hired a blockchain analyst who traced the transactions to his new wallet. The court ordered him to turn over half the cryptocurrency, but he had already moved some to untraceable accounts, costing her a significant portion of their wealth. Story 31. Wife falsely accused husband of domestic violence. To secure full custody and a larger settlement, the wife falsely accused her husband of domestic violence, filing multiple police reports with fabricated injuries. She coached their children to corroborate her story, causing them significant emotional distress. The husband's attorney presented security camera footage from their home showing no evidence of abuse. The judge dismissed her claims and awarded him primary custody, citing her manipulation of the children as harmful. Story 32. Husband sold family heirlooms for pennies. In a spiteful move, the husband sold irreplaceable family heirlooms, including his wife's grandmother's jewelry and antique furniture, to a pawn shop for a fraction of their value. He claimed he needed quick cash to cover living expenses during the divorce. The wife later tracked down some items, but most were gone forever. The court ordered him to compensate her for the estimated value, but he declared bankruptcy, leaving her with nothing. Story 33. Wife lied about income to maximize alimony. The wife, a freelance graphic designer, underreported her income by claiming most of her work was pro bono or unpaid. She provided falsified tax returns to the court to secure higher alimony payments. The husband's lawyer discovered her active online portfolio and client testimonials, proving she was earning significantly more. The court reduced her alimony and ordered her to pay his legal fees for the deception. Story 34. Husband destroyed wife's career reputation. During the divorce, the husband, who worked in the same industry as his wife, spread rumors to her colleagues and clients that she was unprofessional and unstable. He sent anonymous emails with fabricated stories about her work ethic, causing her to lose several major contracts. She hired a private investigator who traced the emails back to him, and the court awarded her damages for defamation, but her professional reputation took years to recover. Story 35. Wife used children as pawns in court. The wife repeatedly withheld visitation from the husband, claiming the children were afraid of him, despite no evidence of abuse. She coached the kids to act withdrawn during court-ordered evaluations to support her claims. A child psychologist eventually testified that the children were being manipulated, and the husband was granted primary custody. The wife's actions strained her relationship with the children, who later resented her for using them in the divorce. Story 36. Wife empties son's savings account during divorce. A lawyer, not specializing in divorce, shared their sister-in-law's actions during her divorce from the narrator's brother after 30-plus years of marriage. She emptied their son's savings account, set up by the narrator's parents with monthly contributions, claiming it was for spending money, though it was meant for university fees. Legally, there was little recourse, but she backed down on financial demands in the settlement when faced with explaining the dispute, and a new account was started for the nephew. Story 37. Husband destroys wife's prize-winning garden in revenge. A non-lawyer recounted a story from their mom's friend, a family lawyer, about a husband and wife in a contentious separation. The wife, a multi-prize-winning gardener with an exceptional collection of rare flowers, faced an unsatisfactory divorce development. The husband retaliated by riding a lawnmower over her entire garden, shredding every stem and leaf, an act likely costing him financially, as her lawyer may have billed him for the destroyed plants. Story 38. Ex-husband leaves company in debt, ruining wife's finances. A non-lawyer dealing with outcomes shared a case where a couple owned a successful renovation company. During their divorce, they agreed she would get the company in-house, while he took the cash and left. Unbeknownst to her, he had stopped paying vendors and payroll taxes, emptying bank accounts, leaving the company on credit. Within a year, she faced employee paychecks bouncing, customer refunds, and had to short-sell the home to close payroll accounts before bankruptcy. Story 39. Wife falsely accuses husband of molestation to harm his career. A former clerk for a judge handling divorce cases described a situation involving two Air Force lieutenant colonels with a daughter, aged 11 or 12. After the husband's affair, the mother, furious over the daughter's preference to stay with him, falsely accused him of molesting and assaulting their daughter to local police, Air Force investigators, and another state's police, all investigations finding no evidence. This traumatized the daughter and harmed the husband's career, leading the judge to threaten contempt and recommend charges. Story 40. Husband drags out divorce to bleed wife dry financially. A non-lawyer shared their wife's sister's experience where her ex-husband, earning $60,000 a year, dragged out the divorce process to increase legal fees, knowing she earned $20,000 from a home daycare. His actions bled her dry, a tactic also seen in another case where a husband, qualifying for legal aid, delayed proceedings, forcing the wife, a teacher, to consider missing mortgage payments to sell the house without his permission, which he withheld. Story 41. Wife forces early pension cash out, husband wastes it. A former secretary for a family law solicitor recounted a case where a wife, a teacher of 30-plus years with a nice pension, had to cash it out early in the divorce settlement, reducing her future benefits, to give the husband 40%, about £20,000. He, an alcoholic, wasted the money and drank himself to death within 2 years, leaving her with a diminished retirement fund. Story 42. Husband tricks wife into moving out, leaves her with nothing. A deleted comment, referenced by others, described a husband who tricked his wife into moving out by saying they needed space, then changed the locks and took everything, leaving her shocked and without time to explain to their children, impacting their emotional well-being during the sudden separation. Story 43. Wife uses hidden tape recorder to catch husband cheating, takes everything. A non-lawyer heard from their mother about a friend, wifey, who suspected her husband was cheating with his ex-wife. In the 1980s, she hid a tape recorder under the couch, caught him planning to meet, and waited until he was on a business trip to change locks, burn his prized saddle, and empty bank accounts, leaving him with nothing when he returned. Story 44. Husband poisons wife's food during divorce. During a divorce case, the husband broke into the wife's home, poisoned some of her food, and left. The wife, who was the client, went to the hospital but ended up being perfectly okay, thankfully. This act of spite endangered her health and escalated the conflict, showing the extreme lengths some spouses go to for revenge in bitter separations. Story 45. Wife accuses husband of abuse to gain custody. In a divorce case, a woman falsely claimed her husband was abusive, detailing how he beat her and the children nightly, despite no evidence. This led to her gaining full custody and half of his assets, including his retirement account and house, bankrupting him. The false claims left him catatonic, and he later committed self-injury, with the mother later becoming a widow and taking all assets. Story 46. Ex-husband leaves car in airport lot for massive fines. A man, after a breakup, left his ex-girlfriend's car in an airport parking lot for 3 years, accumulating $105,000 in fines. He periodically cleared tickets and moved the car to avoid towing, causing her significant financial burden. She was eventually ordered to pay over $4,000, despite his malicious actions, highlighting the legal system's limitations in such cases. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education. If you feel unsafe with your thoughts, please seek professional help.